Yeah, no wonder Viggo can never be replaced. The new Lord of the Rings film proves it. Witnessing modern Hollywood prepare to recast a performance born entirely from dirt, blood, and quiet soul feels like watching a masterpiece get replaced by a photocopy. The announcement of The Lord of the Rings: The Hunt for Gollum, directed by Andy Serkis, immediately exposes the franchise's biggest creative liability. By placing the narrative in the dark decades between Bilbo's departure from the Shire and the Council of Elrond, the script forces a mid-career ranger to carry the physical momentum of the plot. It creates an immediate, suffocating tension between modern corporate IP demands and a performance that permanently anchored a generation of cinema. Warner Bros. And New Line Cinema officially committed to this prequel timeline during their April CinemaCon presentation, effectively cornering themselves into a massive creative dilemma. The story relies entirely on a character whose cinematic identity was forged in dirt, physical sweat, and a gritty, untelevised reality. Trying to recreate that specific aura within a highly calculated studio environment risks breaking the internal logic of the world. The production team isn't just fighting to construct a believable backstory, they're operating under the massive, intimidating weight of an untouched cultural milestone. Every close-up shot of a younger Strider will inevitably be cross-examined by an audience that spent 25 years memorizing the exact weight, posture, and vocal cadence of the original portrayal. Funny thing is, the icon we spent decades obsessing over was actually a complete accident. Peter Jackson actually spent months rehearsing the 26-year-old Irish actor Stuart Townsend, even putting him through intensive sword-fighting camps in New Zealand before cameras rolled in October 1999. But just days into filming the primary footage, Jackson realized Townsend's youthful energy completely lacked the weathered, paternal weight required for an 87-year-old Dunedin Ranger. The studio abruptly fired him, creating a massive logistical vacuum that threatened to derail a multi-million-dollar production schedule. Executive producer Mark Ordesky desperately called Viggo Mortensen at his home, offering him a blind flight to Wellington without a signed contract. Mortensen initially hesitated because he had never read a single page of J.R.R. Tolkien's work, but his 11-year-old son, Henry, begged him to take the job. By the time Mortensen stepped off the plane, he was handed a steel prop sword and thrown directly onto a midnight set to fight off 3 stuntmen dressed as ring wraiths. This chaotic reactor scramble completely stripped away any standard Hollywood vanity from the rehearsal process before day one. And that single night of chaotic, reactive panic instantly killed off any chance of standard Hollywood vanity. Viggo intentionally rejected the polished, hyper-charismatic archetype that dominated late 90s action cinema. He refused to treat Strider as a traditional loudmouth cinematic warrior, opting instead for a performance built on deep, subvocal restraint and heavy physical exhaustion. During the Amon Hen sequence, he spent days dragging his wardrobe through actual mud, intentionally dulling the silver on his vambraces so they wouldn't reflect studio lighting. This hyper-realistic commitment shifted the character's power away from generic theatrical dialogue and placed it entirely into cold, nonverbal presence. He carried himself like an isolated tracker who spent 80 years sleeping on damp moss, maintaining a completely silent posture until a threat materialized. Modern studio blockbusters constantly rely on sarcastic, self-aware quips to deflect genuine tension, but Mortensen played his scenes with absolute sincerity and deadpan focus. He spent months sleeping in his ranger costume and carried his steel sword into local New Zealand restaurants just to make the weapon feel like a natural extension of his daily weight. This relentless, unscripted immersion completely removed the artificial boundary between the actor and the physical landscape, which is exactly why the studio hit a brick wall when they tried to drag him back. When Warner Bros. Executives reached out to gauge his interest in returning for the 2026 prequel, Mortensen didn't hesitate to draw a hard line regarding his own biological reality. At 66 years old, he openly stated in interviews that he would only read a script if the narrative logic strictly matched his actual physical age. He flatly refused to participate in a cheap fan service cameo designed to trick older audiences into buying a theater ticket based on pure nostalgia. This direct rejection stands as a massive blow to a studio system that routinely expects aging actors to cash large corporate paychecks in exchange for compromising their most celebrated work. Mortensen understands that a character whose entire identity is built on raw cannot simply be mimicked by a man decades past his physical prime. His refusal preserves the structural integrity of the original text, ensuring his legendary performance remains locked safely inside the 2001 timeline. He chose artistic accountability over massive commercial syndication, leaving the studio to solve a self-inflicted casting crisis without its original star. With the real king out of the picture, executives turned to a far more dangerous weapon. Hollywood's current obsession with artificial intelligence and digital de-aging software offers a highly flawed escape route for desperate producers. This industry previously attempted this shortcut in The Irishman, utilizing expensive flux software to smooth out wrinkles while completely ignoring basic human biomechanics. While a computer algorithm can easily delete decades from an actor's face, it can't alter the heavy, restricted movement of an aging skeletal structure trying to execute high-intensity stunts. A peak Dunedin tracker requires fluid, lethal agility that cannot be faked by mapping digital skins onto a slower, older performer. This reliance on CGI makeup completely destroys the tactile, physical filmmaking philosophy that made Peter Jackson's original trilogy a timeless masterpiece. Audiences immediately notice the uncanny valley effect when a rendered face disconnects from the organic weight and gravity of a real physical environment. Disney ran into this exact wall with Luke Skywalker in The Mandalorian, proving that synthetic actors lose all genuine emotional resonance. If the studio chooses to take this synthetic route, they risk turning a rugged cultural icon into a plastic, pixelated video game asset that breaks immersion entirely. Thankfully, the tech was dumped, but the live-action replacement is an even bigger gamble. The casting department at New Line Cinema faced an incredibly hostile environment online before a single actor ever signed an official contract. Early industrial production grids leaked a massive pool of potential contenders, causing immediate widespread backlash across legacy Tolkien message boards and fan communities. Internet discussions intensely focus on Leo Woodall following his breakout performance in The White Lotus, with critics arguing his clean, contemporary television styling utterly lacked the rugged gravity of a Northern Dunedain Ranger. Studio scouts also heavily tracked Cosmo Jarvis, hoping his raw physical performance in Shogun could translate into the silent, nonverbal stamina required for a high-intensity survival narrative. These conflicting casting sheets clearly proved that modern Hollywood was struggling to identify a young, physically imposing lead who didn't look like a hyper-polished streaming star. Director Andy Serkis intentionally kept these administrative deliberations under total security lock for months, while the script underwent heavy thematic revisions by Fran Walsh and Philippa Boyens. This extended period of total media silence allowed wild internet speculation to reach an absolute fever pitch. Fans fiercely debated whether the studio would completely compromise its artistic values just to appeal to a younger, modern demographic. The massive creative tension finally exploded into the public domain during the studio's high-stakes April CinemaCon presentation in Las Vegas. A completely unpredicted blockbuster announcement instantly shifted the entire conversation from speculative rumors to concrete, terrifying reality. Warner Bros. Fundamentally altered the future trajectory of the franchise by officially announcing 43-year-old Irish actor Jamie Dornan as Strider. Choosing the 50 Shades and The Fall lead represents a massive, highly calculated corporate gamble that carries enormous creative baggage. Dornan undeniably possesses the sharp, brooding physical intensity needed for the role. But his extensive background in sleek, highly stylized romantic dramas creates immediate skepticism among cinematic purists. The production team is betting everything that he can completely shed his polished, high-fashion persona to embody a filthy, tight-lipped tracker who spent decades sleeping in wild riverbeds. This specific casting choice marks a deliberate shift away from the completely unrefined, dirt-under-the-fingernails realism that Viggo Mortensen fundamentally established in 2001. If Dornan delivers a performance that feels even slightly too manicured, the fragile historical reality of Middle-earth will instantly collapse under the weight of modern audience scrutiny. The ultimate success of this entire prequel relies squarely on his willingness to destroy his own vanity and undergo brutal, unscripted physical degradation on set. This controversial casting decision forces us to look past the surface-level marketing and analyze the deeper core elements that make a cinematic performance entirely permanent. A single calendar date, December 17, 2027, now stands as the ultimate judgment day for the entire legacy. Ultimately, lightning-in-a-bottle performances permanently lock out an intellectual property from ever being truly remade. This upcoming prequel shouldn't be judged as a competitive replacement, but as definitive proof that the chaotic, raw atmosphere of the 2001 production cannot happen twice in modern Hollywood. When an actor completely strips away his personal vanity to live inside a character's physical exhaustion, that image imprints itself into the cultural consciousness permanently. No amount of studio financing, glossy promotional campaigns, or calculated casting shakeups can replicate an icon born from real dirt, heavy steel, and quiet nonverbal soul. Viggo Mortensen didn't just play the Ranger. His complete dedication established an absolute permanent standard for cinematic fantasy that modern corporate filmmaking simply cannot replicate. The real tragedy is that Hollywood keeps trying to rebuild historical lightning with a polished corporate blueprint.